Good afternoon. Thank you, Jong-in, for your kind introduction. And it is a privilege to address such a prestigious forum. I heard about this forum for the first time to come here. But judging by the quality of your introduction remarks and the presence of the audience, I agree that this is one of the most prestigious forum in Korea on international relations. Today we'll talk about, of course, Korea, but Korea does not exist in a political vacuum. So we have to talk about Northeast Asia. To talk about Northeast Asia, we have to define a framework. We cannot talk this and this, but we need a framework to develop our discussion. And I will start by a paradigm shift, because we are living in a transition of a paradigm from old paradigm of war, raid, to a new paradigm of trade or commerce. Let me quote H.G. Wells, the British writer, thinker, author of The Time Machine. He said this, quote, "From what we know of mankind, we are bound to conclude that the first sailors plundered whenever they could and traded when they had to." This will set the tone of our entire discussion, so let me repeat once again. From what we know of mankind, we are bound to conclude that the first sailors plundered whenever they could and traded when they had to. This leads us to the paradigm shift. Looking back, the entire history of until Second World War was a history of raid. Think about all those heroes, from Alexander to Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, Salman, Napoleon, even Hitler. They were all very successful raiders, conquerors. The more successful you are in the raid, the bigger hero you become. So raid was the old paradigm. But it ceased to work after the Second World War. What is important in the new paradigm is trade replaced raid as a dynamics of the international relations, as hinted by H.G. Wells. Because of some new developments, nations found that raid does not bring profit. And they figured out that with the trade, they can get all the profit they want. So it's not because we became a good nation, good person with the same human nature, and nations look for national interests. But difference is, before the Second World War, the raid, occupation, colonization, physical occupation, enslavement of other people were the most profitable business. But after Second World War, occupation does not bring profit. Look what happened to the Soviet Union Empire, Soviet Empire. Moscow could not exploit the so-called satellite countries the way former empires did. Quite on the contrary, Moscow had to subsidize the puppet regimes. So economically, it was a bleeding, it was minus. So Soviet Union withdrew from the satellite countries without being forced to do. It did it because of the internal contradictions, not by a defeat from the contending forces. So after Second World War, I don't see any instances, not a single instance, where nations expanded their territory, occupied other nations, exploited other people. So we are living in a different world. So we have to have that in mind. Paradigm shift from raid to trade. Some of you may say that, well, how to explain the Ukrainian situation? Exactly. Had this happened before Second World War, Soviet Union simply would have occupied before any other country intervened Ukraine and made it its own territory. But now Russia is hesitating, sending out arms in indirect manner and declaring that we have no intention to occupy Ukraine, no invasion. So this is exactly evidence that paradigm shift took place. ISIS, the same thing. If the Iraq invasion of 1991 took place before the Second World War, there was an occupation, an exploitation. But that was not in the card. So Washington withdrew its troops, creating power vacuum. And ISIS filled in that power vacuum. So this is another argument you can support the paradigm shift. So the trade paradigm, this is the framework we are going to discuss international relations. One of the specific feature of this new paradigm is the transition from international conflicts to intranational conflicts. Today's all the conflicts we are witnessing are intranational nature because nations do not make wars, seeing no profit. According to statistics, these days over 95% of conflicts are intranational nature. Trade paradigm. The powerful nations do not see any interest to invade other countries or conquer, contrary to what we have been used to do for many thousand years. And the other example is gender equality. This is not because we have a moral obligation. This is because of the paradigm shift. With the military raid paradigm, what is important was our muscle, brawn power. And naturally, man dominates woman. But the trade paradigm, what is important is the brain power, not the brawn power. So when it comes to brain power, our female colleagues are on a par, if not superior, to male colleagues. So gender equality is a must. We have to abide by to survive and prosper in new paradigm. The evidence is in all the developed countries, you see the very high level of female participation in everything. On the other hand, in developing countries, the rate is very, very low. So gender equality is another evidence that we are living with a new paradigm. So with this framework, how do we interpret the Northeast Asia? We all live in Northeast Asia on the Korean Peninsula, and let me argue that Korea becomes, in a way, center of the world. Let me explain why. The East Asia, by which I mean Confucian East Asia, covering China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and northern part of Vietnam, accounted for only 10% of global economic output after the Second World War. 10%. Today, about 25 to 27% global economic output. This is zero-sum context, and there is almost threefold increase. This is a historic rise in East Asia. By virtue of this historic rise, East Asia is now counted one of the three major economic centers in the world, along with North America and Europe. Each, they accounts for, again, about 25% of global economic output. But looking to the future, let's see the demographic aspect. In East Asia, you have 1.6 billion people. In North America, 400 million. In Europe, again, 400 million people. So in this area, you have twice more population than North America and Europe combined. And the quality of their work. In this area, you still have what they call Confucian work ethics. which the characteristics are focus on education, hard work, savings, and deferred gratification. These work ethics are stronger in this region than in the West. So future is brighter in this region when it comes to economic development. And across the Pacific, you have the United States. So the United States is very much present in this region. Alliance with Japan, alliance with Korea, and their troops are stationed here. So in Northeast Asia, you have top 3 global economic powers. America first, China second, Japan third. And South Korea, despite North Korea's never ceasing problems, is now ranked at the 12th world economy. So this is in a way a confluence of world powers on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia. We have 4 elements to consider when it comes to Northeast Asia. The first one is, of course, Sino-American relationship. When I was ambassador in Washington 2 years ago, I could see there were 2 schools in Washington, in Congress, in think tanks, in administration. The school A was the students of the raid paradigm. They posited that there will be conflict between China and the United States, because in history there has always been a confrontation between established power, which is the United States, and rising power, which is China. So there must be a conflict. That is under the raid paradigm, which was true under the raid paradigm. All the time there was a direct military confrontation between 2 powers, status quo power and imperial power. And the fate was decided by military confrontation. There's school A, and they have many valid arguments. The school B, who are predominantly in the administration and the think tanks, in other words, who are better informed, they envision different future on the Sino-American relationship. In other words, they are envisioning the relationship within the framework of a new paradigm, of trade. Direct confrontation does not bring profit anymore. So cooperation, there already is, the interdependence is there, and competition naturally is there because nations compete as individual competes in the society. Conflict may be inevitable. The 2 huge nations, they have all the aspects of relationship, so conflict may be inevitable, but not confrontation. The conflict will be resolved by negotiation, diplomatic talks, rather than military confrontation. So that is School B. And I remain convinced that School B will prove to be true. There will be competition, confrontation, yes, across the Pacific, and China will naturally try to become world #1 power. True. The United States will remain world #1 power by hampering China's rise, which is also true. It's in their nature, nations' self-preservation instinct. But what is it changed is the mode of the engagement. China will seek to become #1 power by a fait accompli without confrontation. This is important. Fait accompli without confrontation. How is it possible? Imagine the game of Wei Qi, game of Go or game of Baduk. That is the game China will play with the United States. There will be no direct overall confrontation like Western chess. The Western chess was the way the fate was decided between 2 powers, status quo, imperial power. But this time, because of the paradigm shift, because of the trade paradigm, the game played between the United States and China will be game of Wei Qi. not Western chess. So there will be multiple focus of competition and conflict, if you will, but never overall confrontation. So when the game is over, it is over. Without our rendering the exact process, there will be a fait accompli. Psi will reserve which power will become the number one power in 2 or 3 decades, but it will be done by a fait accompli, not a direct confrontation. So which is very good for Northeast Asia and the world, and especially South Korea. In this area, Northeast Asia, we have territorial disputes, a quarrel about history issues, and even the naming of a sea became a hot issue between nations. But on these issues, there will be confrontation, yes. Now there will be conflict, posturing, and diplomatic arguments, and some deployment of capabilities, but I don't believe there will be confrontation. China, Japan, South Korea will never fight each other because of Daedo Senkaku Island, because of Dokdo Island, because of Dongye or other name of this issue. Because there is no interest. History is the same thing. Because of this issue, there will be frictions, conflicts, diplomatic difficulties, but I don't think there will be confrontation because of this issue. So whenever I went out to speak when I was in Washington, the most important question from the floor was, you sound rather positive, but how do you see the future of this conflict around the islands or South China Sea Islands? And my answer was, you have to understand the paradigm shift. And East Asian civilization, there will not be confrontation. It will be resolved within the framework of diplomatic negotiations and dialogue, not by confrontation. For this, it is also very important to understand East Asian civilization, which is rather different from the Western civilization. In a nutshell, Eastern civilization aims at not having the crisis, as opposed to Western posture, which is resolving the crisis. So Eastern civilization aims at management of the situation. On the other, Western civilization aims at resolving of the crisis. So within Eastern civilization, if you have a crisis, that is tantamount to failure of the management. So we try to not to have the crisis. Avoidance of the crisis is our prime objective. Look at the history for 1,000 years, or last millennium, 1,000 years. How many wars and conflicts did you have in the West? How many in the East? Barring the Mongols and Manchus, who are not the Confucian really civilization of they do not enter the framework, China never ventured out of its frontier, not a single time. 1,000 years. China proper never ventured out of its frontier. That talks a great deal. It would be very difficult for China to engage in a war, expensive war, by deploying military capabilities. And Japan did it 2 times, only 2 times I will say, that brought unspeakable sufferings to Korean people, but still only 2 times. That's all. How many wars and conflicts are there in the West? So we have different civilizations. So I'm telling this not pass a moral judgment, but ask you to understand the importance of Eastern civilization. And we have different perspectives. Avoidance of a crisis is our aim, and in the West, resolution of crisis is the aim of the West. So this again proves that there will be no confrontation surrounding territorial issues or historic issues. The third element, what does that all mean for South Korea? Let me share with you some statistics. As of last year marked 21st years of establishment relationship between South Korea and China. Some 20 years ago, there was virtually very low trade between the countries, insignificant. Last year, $270 billion of trade. 20 years ago, there was not a single direct flight between South Korea and China. Last year, 840 direct flights per week. And the tourist exchange of people, not even 100. Last year, over 7 million exchange of people. Compared to this, the trade volume between US and Korea was only $100 billion. And the direct flight, half of that between Korea and China. And people exchange, again, less than half between China and Korea. So this presents to South Korea a schizophrenic situation. 20 years ago, everything depended on the relationship between Korea and the US. Security, Korea-American relationship. Economy, Korea-American relationship. Culture, values, everything. So we have to think about only one pillar of our foreign policy. Now we have two pillars. Security with the United States, values with the United States. So we share democracy and market economy. But economy is clearly with China because the trend will grow. The trade with China for South Korea will grow in much more rapid pace than trade between South Korea and the United States. So how do we manage this? Security with the United States and economy with China. Here comes the importance of the paradigm shift. If we lived with old paradigm, then South Korea is doomed. Because there is no way to maintain two partnership when there is a conflict between the two. If the United States and China enter into military confrontation, South Korea cannot say, I will choose both of you. You have to make a choice between the two. That is unbearable, unthinkable burden to South Korean diplomacy. But because the United States and China will not confront, they will cooperate, they will compete, there may be frictions, conflicts, but not confrontation. So we can manage two pillars of South Korean diplomacy, which is alliance with the United States and cooperation with China. They are not contradictory. With much more comfortable margin than you can possibly imagine. In my interaction with State Department officials when I was ambassador in Washington, I didn't encounter a single instance that they worried about South Korea-Chinese economic exchange, and not a single voice disagreeing that China and the United States can work the future between the two. So the much more the public opinion of those writers who remain prisoner of the old paradigm of rate. They think that South Korea will have difficulty because they have to choose one of the two, but not the informed experts. So this is a sine qua non for South Korean diplomacy. We can manage both. And one important aspect is that the value of democracy and market economy is infiltrating China in a rapid pace. And whatever the counter arguments, China may be still communist country, especially Congress in Washington, and other arguments, I truly believe that China is sharing democracy and market economy with United States and Korea and Japan. So expanding the relationship with China, economic and trade, is promoting democracy and market economy in the region as a whole. And China last year had $1 trillion of trade with the US, Japan, South Korea combined. $1 trillion. So the future is with us. So we can forge a common future based on values, not by conflictual national interests. That brings me the fourth element, Japan, South Korea-Japan relationship. You will be reading most of the time negative aspects because journalists are not interested in positive aspects. But look at the positive aspects between two countries. Japan remains second largest trading partner of Korea, and this relationship has not been affected by the rows surrounding historical issues or the island issues or naming of the channel issues. So it is there. We succeeded in managing, in saving the positive aspect from the negative political or national sentiment rows. And the tourism, a little bit diminished, but I myself traveled 4 times last year in Japan. I could not see any indication, any hostility from Japanese people because I'm Korean. And in the subway in Korea, metro in Korea, I sometimes see a group of Japanese young generation, and they speak freely Japanese and laughing and talking each other. And Koreans in the subway, they don't even pay attention. They take it for granted, natural. We are having 6 million people exchange between the countries. So these are not affected, which is very important. And we have to keep it apart from the political row. That means we have to put on the back burner the sovereignty issues, the territorial issues about the islands and channel issues. Without war, sovereignties cannot be resolved. But we are not at all ready, or we agreed to have a war without resolving those issues. So it's better for both Tokyo and Seoul to put those issues on the back burner, ever putting out in front, because there is nothing to be gained. So I think it can be managed on that premise. But historical issue is another matter. It is in our life every day. So I think it will be an illusion that we could put historical issues on the back burner. It will be there with us. Also, I think it will be an illusion for two people that we do not have differences. We can somehow resolve this issue in dialogue, in talk. I don't believe in that proposition. The difference is really fundamental. And I think we have to live through it, muddle through this problem. Especially with Abe's administration, I don't see any smooth transition or smooth future regarding historical issues, because we truly believe Abe and his ministers remain convinced that there is nothing wrong for Japan having the Second World War. The only sin we incurred was defeat. I truly believe that was Mr. Abe's internal belief. With that belief in a president, in a prime minister and his entourage, I don't see really any possibility of true reconciliation. As long as Mr. Abe is in place as a political leader, we have to muddle through it, unfortunately. But I still believe that that can be contained. Because we are not going to destroy the mutually beneficial trade relationship, cultural exchange, or tourism because of that row. It will be silly for us to do that. That is for the Northeast Asia. Now, North Korea. The best way to understand North Korean question, including nuclear question, is through new paradigm. North Korea is doing exactly what Soviet Union did, diverting all the resources from people's need to the militarization. And people are starving, but they have nuclear weapons and missiles with better capability than South Korea. It's a nonsense. But that is the way it is in North Korea. North Korea is living with old paradigm of rate. They are ready against any rate invasion from outside. They are doing quite well in that aspect. But it's archaic, anachronistic. North Korea cannot survive in the world of new paradigm trade with all the preparations doing for the old paradigm. That brings North Korea isolation and eventually collapse if Pyongyang does not make strategic decision. And nuclear question has become indivisible, inseparable from North Korean question. So I don't think we can make a negotiation on nuclear question as a standalone issue. We have to absolutely deal North Korean nuclear question along with the North Korean question itself. In other words, North Korean nuclear question will be resolved only when North Korean question will be resolved. They become inseparable. And it will be an illusion again to think that somehow we can persuade North Korea to get rid of the nuclear weapons program without having regard to the future of the regime or country. I don't think that they will bring any concrete result. For North Korea, simply they have two options: Chinese and Soviet option. And North Korea knows that they cannot go on like what they have been doing all the time. They have to go towards Chinese option. In other words, Chinese, Vietnamese, or Burmese option, if you will. You have to make a strategic choice to get out of the old trade regime and join the new trade regime, just like China did. But problem is the regime in Pyongyang consider that may bring down the regime itself. If I open the North Korea for the trade investment to the outside, then the regime would collapse. In other words, North Korea cannot handle its opening. That's what North Korean regime thinks. The Kaesong industrial complex is a case in point. 10 years ago when we started with 2,000 North Korean labor forces. Now, 52,000, a huge development. But this is only the facade. The fundamental problem remains unchanged. That is, the last hurdle we discussed in North Korea 10 years ago was who will get the salary. We insist until the last moment that we have to pay directly North Korean laborers, North Korean people working in the factory. Pyongyang said no deal. You have to pay me, and I will pay them. So we accepted this compromise. But still, compromise is good for both Koreas. That's why it increased from 2,000 to 50,000. But that does not mean that we have been resolving the problem of North Korea. North Korea is under tight control of Kaesong industrial complex. So North Korea change, the sign of strategic choice, opening up reform, means only one thing in the end. Whether Kim Jong-un will allow a single North Korean citizen to be employed by foreign company and receive the salary and spend it as he or she fits. That will be the telltale sign. Until now, we don't have any single instance. But look at what Korea had done in the past. Exactly, we allowed Korean citizens, gave economic freedom. Apply for the foreign investment company, get a job, get paid, and spend it, and spread this mode to other regions, other people. China tried to do exactly what North Korea is doing now. In the Southeast Economic Zone, they sent out workforces by Beijing, received salary, and divided salary between the workforce and Beijing regime. The genius Deng Xiaoping was, he realized it will never enable China to have a genuine economic development. So in 1986, despite all the oppositions, he allowed people living in this economic zone to find their job, get paid, and spend as they fit. So this is what North Korea should do. And North Korean regime thinks that if they do it, then they would collapse. So what they are doing now is a so-called two-track strategy. In other words, they want to preserve nuclear weapons and missiles at the same time, somehow make the economy work. This is the expression of their dilemma, not a policy. It can never work. It's not in human nature. So North Korea has no policy now. They simply muddle through. In the end, the contradiction will accumulate and collapse like Soviet Union if they do not make a strategic choice. So in the end, it's up to North Korea, because there is very few the outside world can do. South Korea, we have no leverage. The United States, Europe, we don't have any leverage, unlike Iran's case. China may have some leverage, but Chinese foreign policy, the tradition is not the way the Western countries do. It's management, not resolution. China will take time to manage North Korean issue. That brings to South Korea. What happened to South Korea? How do we deal with the North Korean question? I think the best strategy we can envisage is positioning ourselves. Because having design while North Korea is in dilemma does not work. You cannot plan things. You can't have this and this design or plans or framework. The North Korea does not move and it will collapse. It cannot possibly work. So we have to position ourselves for both cases. If North Korea makes strategic decision, there will be massive South Korean investment from Japan, from Europe, from the United States, and South and North Korea will become like Taiwan and mainland China. They will be moving towards integration, if not outright reunification, which is very good scenario for everybody. We'll welcome open-minded manner North Korea's opening their society. So we have to prepare ourselves. But more importantly, we have to position ourselves in case North Korea remain unable to make a decision. And we need deterrence. Deterrence comes from our own capability, but comes from US-Korea alliance. We have to value the alliance and keep it functional as long as North Korean question remains. And the other one is cooperation with China, because China becomes important for the region and North Korea shares the frontier with China. So for South Korea, positioning is important, and positioning means deterrence and dialogue with North Korea, and preparation for the contingency in case North Korea collapses. The problem is we do not know how and when it may happen. It depends on North Korea. We have to prepare ourselves. The conclusion is preparing for the future North Korean question really depends on us. Under the raid paradigm, it does not depend on us. China is much more powerful to South Korea, Japan powerful, United States powerful. They will come to grab North Korea under the raid paradigm. But with the new trade paradigm, North Korea is a burden. Nobody wants to take responsibility for the North Korean population, 25 million people and the poverty there. So only South Korea can take the responsibility. There is one caveat there. In other words, we have to show to the world, to the US and China and Japan, that we can handle it. Only on that basis, they will trust us and let us handle it. But if they see South Korea incapable of handling the situation, the process North Korean collapse unification, and they will try to secure their own national interest without consulting South Korea. So we have to be prepared to take the responsibility and show the capability to interested countries. And for that, we have two hurdles. One is we have to get over the persecution mentality in terms of politics and diplomacy. Persecution mentality is in the peculiarity of our psyche, unique to South Korea. We have witnessed for last 20 years, beginning 1994, Uruguay round, the rice market. We completely mishandled this case because of the persecution mentality. In 1997 financial crisis, again, we mishandled it. We still call it IMF situation, as though IMF was the culprit, although the main cause is lied with us. In 2002, the tragic accident of the death of two girls, at that time we treated it as a crime, which was a tragic accident. So we mishandled it. In 2008, the mad cow disease beef demonstration, which paralyzed the government for almost 4 months, we mishandled it by exaggerating the non-existent danger of mad cow disease because of the persecution mentality. And 2011, the long, protracted, futile debate on the Korea-US FTA. Almost all the arguments proven groundless, but the entire country was bricked for 2 years because of these false arguments. So these persecution mentality we have to get over somehow, but they are deep and profound. I don't know how to deal with it. It will remain a heavy burden to Korean diplomacy. The other one is, of course, economy. If you do not have the economic power clout, it will be difficult to handle North Korean question after its collapse. And I will not go into detail. We are in a struggle between the fair competition and the typical social welfare trap. And the future, next several years will be crucial because it will decide the direction, whether we will revert to the healthy and economically correct fair competition mode, or this unhealthy and in the end, which will provoke decline of South Korean economy, the social welfare trap. That's about it.
Okay. Any questions and comments from the floor? Yes, please.
This is Hong Joo-na, co-chair of Dokdo Protection Headquarters, Humsada, the oldest NGO in Korea. We celebrated the year before last year, one event. And you said the ambassador, Professor Chen, didn't to fight for Dokdo or Senkaku and that other island. But I regret. Completely, utterly unable to share with you. Because Korea has accomplished history and by international law, territorial sovereignty over Tokyo. But not Japan. Japan has never had legal territorial sovereignty over Tokyo, but for occupation by force. I think it is impossible for Japan's government, to lay any claim to Tokyo without violating Article 2A and Article 19D of Peace Treaty, as well as UN Resolution AG 2625, 1930, October 24, define any territorial invasion. And I wonder, if you And I wish you would have a chance to go to Japan and say and explain the same topic of needing to fight for people. Thank you.
I regret that I might have misunderstood because I totally agree with what you said as a Korean. I cannot but agree. What I explained is not South Korean position or Japanese position. What I tried to say was Korea will not go into war against Japan because of this island. Do you think Korea
We
will?
should do.
Pardon?
We have to fight against Japan
No.
for protection of holy soil.
No.
But Japanese will be for two Japanese. It will be first invasion war.
My question is, we will fight against Japan diplomatically in discussions with the theories, arguments. What I'm telling you is Korea will not invade Japan to resolve the issue of Dokdo Island. I don't think Japan invade Korea to resolve the issue of Dokdo Island. So there will be no war because of this issue. That's my point. If you think there will be a war, South Korea should invade Japan to resolve this issue, we have differences. As long as you do not believe in war, we are on the same.
But Ambassador
Ground.
Choi has a very strong view of a so-called Kantian capitalist peace view, or what IR theorists call the commercial liberalist view. That's a very important point because nowadays in Korea we have a bunch of realists, balance of power determinists. Okay, in light of the kinds of so-called paradigm dominance in South Korea, Ambassador Choi's view on really trade matters